I'm Tariq Rauf. For the last 12 years, I was head of verification and security policy coordination at the International Atomic Energy Agency in an office that reported directly to the Director General. And I led a team to Iran in which Iran agreed to sign the additional protocol in 2003. Currently, I'm the director of the Arms Control, Disarmament, and Non-Proliferation Program at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute in Sweden.
Thank you very much for being with us. The first question I'd like to ask today is, what are the current challenges in the areas of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament?
That's a very broad question, and I think it's a very apt question for today, and particularly the discussions that we are having at this Strategic Studies Network in Bangkok. The nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime, which has been with us since the end of the Second World War, is, I think, today at a very important crossroads. There is a lot of unhappiness among many of the non-nuclear weapon states about the pace of nuclear disarmament. Among the 5 nuclear weapon states that are recognized under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which are China, France, United Kingdom, Russian Federation, and the United States. Particularly the Nuclear Cooperation Agreement under the Bush administration in 2005 between the United States and India reversed decades of long-standing U.S. non-proliferation policy, and it has also changed, in a sense, the balance in the Non-Proliferation Treaty in terms of the benefits of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy for those countries that have renounced nuclear weapons and have accepted verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency on their civilian nuclear programs. On the other hand, nuclear weapon states, such as the United States, for example, are very concerned about activities carried out in non-nuclear weapon states, such as, for example, currently in Iran, previously in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and also in North Korea. Given time considerations, I will just focus very briefly on Iran in the sense that Iran's undeclared nuclear activities were contrary to its Safeguards Agreement and also the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this creates some doubts among the nuclear weapon states about the wisdom of reducing their nuclear weapons further. So in a nutshell, one could say that the current nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime, while it has yielded many benefits over the previous decades, needs some further attention now. And at the 2015 Review Conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that would be a very good forum for very detailed discussions on how to move forward.
And how do you think the upcoming session of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Preparatory Committee for the 2015 Review Conference will play out?
The third session of the Preparatory Committee for the 2015 NPD Review Conference will be held in New York this year in 2014, in the last week of April and the first week of May. This Preparatory Committee meeting is supposed to make the preparations for the 2015 NPD Review Conference. It will review what was agreed in 2010, which was the last NPD Review Conference, which is held every 5 years. In 2010, a wide-ranging agenda was agreed on nuclear non-proliferation, on nuclear disarmament, and on the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And this was captured in a final document, which comprised of 64 actions. Some of the actions in the area of nuclear non-proliferation, for example, were the acceptance of the additional protocol of the IAEA by all non-nuclear weapon states. While some progress has been made, there are still important countries that have not yet implemented additional protocols, such as, for example, Egypt, Iran, Syria, and some others. In the area of nuclear disarmament, the nuclear weapon states were expected to take further steps in reducing their nuclear weapons. And while the New START treaty between the United States and the Russian Federation is being implemented, and President Obama is calling for further reductions by another third, the state of relations between Moscow and Washington has cast a damper on further reductions between the U.S. and Russia. So I think this will be an issue for contention. And also there are important divisions about the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. We can discuss that a little bit separately. There's also discussion about peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty fundamentally recognizes the right of all countries to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, such as power generation, agriculture, nuclear medicine, but not to develop nuclear weapons. And this, again, is something that is verified by the IAEA. Generally, it is doing a very good job, but there are still some areas of consideration. So I expect that at this year's session of the Preparatory Committee, the main issues of discussion will be a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, and also a new issue which has come up, which is the humanitarian dimensions of nuclear weapons. 146 countries recently met at a place called Tariq in Mexico. This is following up to a previous conference held in Oslo in March last year, where these non-nuclear weapon countries are highlighting the damaging effects on human beings and the environment of any use of nuclear weapons or any explosion of nuclear weapons by accident, and that the international community is not set up to deal with the medical and environmental consequences of any nuclear detonation. And therefore, these 146 countries, which number is actually growing, would like the nuclear weapon states to radically reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. This is a promise that President Obama made in Berlin, and he also made in Prague. And there are some views that despite President Obama's promise, not enough is being done. So I will leave it at that for now.
Now, returning to Iran, how do you assess its nuclear program and the recent negotiations in both Geneva and Vienna?
It is very good that recently in November, the European Union, the European three countries, that is the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, and three nuclear weapon states, the United States, China, and the Russian Federation. So these 6 countries negotiated with Iran and reached agreement on a joint plan of action, which is addressed towards resolving concerns about possible military dimensions. There are allegations going back to 2002 and 2003, and further reinforced in 2005, that Iran had a clandestine program hidden from everyone to develop nuclear weapons. And these issues need to be resolved. The Iranian position is that nuclear weapons are against their national interest, that they are against Islam, and that the information alleging military work in the nuclear area by Iran is based on forged and fabricated documentation. The verifying agency is the International Atomic Energy Agency, and for the past decade, the IAEA has been carrying out verification in Iran, but progress has been stalled on this military aspect. So following the negotiations in Geneva, where on the 24th of November, the 7 countries reached agreement on a joint plan of action, whereby Iran would stop producing 20% enriched uranium, which is still low enriched uranium, would convert this into a much lower enrichment level, that is below 5%, provide further transparency to the IAEA. What was left unsaid was how to resolve the possible military dimensions. And last week there were negotiations in Vienna, which also went well, where the sides have agreed on a framework to discuss these issues further. Finally, on this issue, on the 20th of February, the IAEA issued its latest report, which confirmed that Iran was implementing the joint plan of action agreed in Geneva, that Iran was also implementing a framework for cooperation agreed with the IAEA in February this year. But again, the issue of possible military dimensions is one that still needs to be resolved. There are 7 areas of concern which relate to the development of a nuclear warhead, the development of a warhead that could be fitted onto the Shahab-3 ballistic missile, a missile that Iran is developing. An important problem here is that the IAEA as an international organization doesn't have the capability to verify information provided by other countries such as Israel and the United States, which is based on intelligence information. And by its very nature, intelligence information is very difficult to verify because the countries that collect such information, for obvious reasons, do not want to share how they collected this information and from where this information came. So this will be a final challenge. And the last point I'd like to make is that the enrichment facilities in Iran at Natanz and at Fordow are the most heavily verified enrichment facilities anywhere in the world. So these facilities are not the main areas of concern. The main areas of concern regarding Iran's nuclear program are whether or not it in the past was working on developing a nuclear weapon. The United States National Intelligence Estimate of 2003 concluded that in that year Iran stopped such activity and it has not been resumed since. And the United States has not changed the findings of this NIE since. So this is the final challenge with regards to Iran to make a conclusion whether or not it had in the past worked on a nuclear weapon development program.
Lastly, what are the prospects of setting up a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East?
In the region of the Middle East, all countries are party as non-nuclear weapon states to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Only Israel has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty or the NPT. The NPT defines, for its purposes, a nuclear weapon state that had manufactured and exploded a nuclear weapon before 1 January 1967. And this date is important because in the open literature, there is some discussion that Israel might have developed nuclear weapons around that time. And so under the definition of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, neither Israel nor India and Pakistan nor North Korea can be recognized as nuclear weapon states, even though it is widely believed that all four of these countries have nuclear weapons. India and Pakistan tested them in 1998. The North Koreans tested for the first time in 2006. There are some reports about a possible Israeli test with South African cooperation in 1979, but that has never been proven. So with regard to the Middle East, a proposal was originally made by Iran in the time of the Shah in 1974 to create a nuclear weapon-free zone in the region of the Middle East. This was then broadened to be an area free of all weapons of mass destruction, that is not only nuclear but also biological and chemical, as well as the delivery means, which means ballistic missiles. So this is a very complicated issue in a very complicated region. The position of Israel is that they would be prepared to discuss a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, provided there was a peace settlement with all the Arab countries, that this peace settlement was working well, that Israel was recognized, and at the end of a process of peace, once trust had been established, a nuclear weapon-free zone could be negotiated. The Arab position is exactly the opposite. They believe that discussion should start on a nuclear weapon-free zone right away. Once such a zone is established, trust would be created, which would then result in peace. So you see that there are two very opposing dynamics here, and at the moment there doesn't seem to be any possibility of reconciliation. In 2010, at the NPT Review Conference, it was agreed that there should be a conference in the Middle East involving all Middle Eastern countries on a nuclear weapon-free zone and a zone free of other weapons of mass destruction. The United States was a full party to this. It signed on to this. The Obama administration committed to such a conference. But after 2010, we had the Arab Spring starting in Tunisia, then in Cairo, then in Syria. So this has sort of delayed the start of the conference, which has led to a lot of frustration on the Arab side. On the other hand, you see Prime Minister Netanyahu going to the United Nations and warning against the red lines of Iran's nuclear program. So unfortunately, at the moment, the conditions are not very good for such discussions. Even though a facilitator has been appointed, this is Ambassador Jaakko Laeva of Finland, who has held 3 rounds of informal discussions in Switzerland, and another round is expected shortly. This issue will be a make-or-break issue for the 2014 session of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Preparatory Committee and the 2015 NPT Review Conference. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, would have an important role along with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to do the verification for nuclear weapons and chemical weapons. Egypt has not signed the Chemical Weapons Treaty, and as I mentioned, Israel hasn't signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So there can be certain measures where the countries can sign these treaties, and hopefully this can lead to a process where there can be a discussion on arms control and regional security in the region of the Middle East.